we need to change now. That's why we get the chickens too, because eggs, it's not just about wanting to have your egg. It's about learning what they put in your egg. They vaccinate chickens with God knows what. They then spray their eggs right after they say it's fully organic and pasture raised and whatever, free cage, whatever, the logos, the names, the nice names they lie to us. And then you realize that a company owned by this horrible guy that I don't even mention their names anymore spray something on the egg just to make sure it will last longer, like they say, or prevent us from getting bacteria. And when you see those chemicals, you're like, hey, wait, I clean my floor with those chemicals. Like, is that good for you?
Welcome back to episode 4 of Grow Food Homestead podcast, where we explore things related to self sufficiency, homesteading, growing your own food. Today, I am very happy to have Pedro as our special guest. He is originally from Brazil, but he now lives in South Florida, rural South Florida, and he homesteads here in the local area. So I'm very excited to have him as a guest. So welcome, Pedro. How are you doing today?
Hey, Andres, thanks for having me, man. I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you for having to taking the time, especially after this Hurricane Milton, right, that passed through. Thankfully, it was a little bit north of us, right? So we didn't get the full hit, but I know that it's been, as you mentioned, a crazy week. So I really appreciate your time joining us today. So yeah, let me get right into the
Yeah,
questions.
we
Oh no, go ahead. I think there's a little bit of a delay on the video.
yeah, I was talking about I'm a little bit north than you. I know you're in Fort Lauderdale area. I'm in Loxahatchee, which is Palm Beach County, and we had quite a few tornadoes here in the area. We actually got hit pretty bad. My yard is still flooded. I lost two trees, a papaya, a banana, and a regular tree that we had in the yard. But it's all good, nature. We learn from it.
Definitely, it's part of the journey, and as you mentioned, we learn from it, right? We take notes so that next time we could be a little bit better prepared. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. And the first question is really just a general question so that the people listening get to know you a little bit better. So if you can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into homesteading?
Okay, so I've been living in US for 20 years. I was originally from Brazil. I was born and raised over there. Got here when I was 26. And agriculture always runs in a family. My grandparents, they were both from my dad side, they were both in the agriculture. My grandmother, she was into flowers. She grew beautiful azaleas in Portugal, and then they moved to Brazil. That's way back in the days. And on my grandfather's side, he was a monoculture for tomatoes. And I believe everybody knows, or almost everybody knows nowadays, that monoculture is not the way of doing it. So that's why maybe he failed. And this runs in the family. So when I told my parents I was gonna move to a farm area to grow food, they were like, "Oh, but your grandfather, that what happened?" And I said, "Yeah, but there's the process of evolution here, and we learn from our mistakes and everything." So I'm here now, living in Loxahatchee on a 1.2 acres, growing my food. learning with nature, like we said a couple minutes before about the. I'm sorry, there's a guy blowing right here. But yeah. So I've been here for 2 years on this beautiful property. The guy before, he was doing stuff with horses, work with horses. So the soil was pretty depleted. It was all sand when I got here. So we started to process of regeneration on the soil and learning and stewarding the land. And now we're growing beautiful fruit trees here. Today, right before the podcast here, I had to remove some cassava, yucca, because they were knocked down from the storm. But hey, beautiful one, big ones. You smell the soil. You see when you pull it, all these beautiful creatures over there, and it's amazing, man. I'm mind blown.
Definitely. Yeah, we're gonna have to figure out the delay, right? Because I think there's like a 2 3 second delay, but it's awesome, man. Very interesting how you said, that agriculture runs in the family. I'm definitely going to um, come back to that in a question later on in the show. But it's very interesting, the whole thing about monoculture, because yeah, it's how we have sort of been taught in the past few decades that that is the way of agriculture. But once you really get into it and start doing some research, you realize that there are so many other methods and principles out there that are much more effective and better for nature and for production. And you did touch already a little bit about it, which comes to my next question. Uh, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when you first started learning how to grow your own vegetables and raising livestock or chickens?
Wow. We had a bunch of ups and downs, a bunch of curves until we learned that, to be honest with you, that we are nature, right? So when I got here, I was still separated from nature. I always loved nature, but I didn't have nature inside. So that's the main thing that I've learned, because I started to try to control weeds. For example, the grass, it's always a problem, and birds, butterflies, and then once you realize you cannot control them because we're part of them, like the biggest mistake we made as humans is to think that, oh, we're in the top of the pyramid and we don't need them. But so when I started to integrate this mind and work with them, like I put some bird houses in the yard. I plant some milkweed plants, for example, a bunch of plants that brings the pollinators, brings the birds, and it creates a stable ecosystem. So once I changed that piece of the puzzle, it grew magically. Stuff started to happen. Like birds started to come, not in a destructive way, but like to grab food here and there, and like so we and planting a diversity of stuff too. So you spoke about monoculture. It's going to be one of the questions too. And once I realized that you just don't plant just tomatoes here, and I planted everything together, like it changed it a lot. So the curve from the chickens, we never raised chickens before, so it was a new thing for us. We have twins. I have two daughters. They're 10 now, and we did it for them and for the eggs too, like, and also the manure for the chickens. So the biggest curve, to be honest, knock on wood, we didn't have any.
Oh, okay, that is awesome. I mean, the integrating nature instead of controlling it. I love that because um, we tend to try to get rid of the problem, but one of the principles is the problem is the solution, right? So, but we have to figure out how to make it the solution. It takes a little bit of effort, a little bit of research, planning, trial and error, and then once you put in the work, how you mentioned, then that ecosystem starts to become stable. So I really like that, man. And yeah, definitely the ups and downs and learning from nature is something that anybody that wants to get into growing their own food and homesteading is going to go through. And this is why we have this platform, is to share our ideas, share our experiences, so that then others could learn from our mistakes and save time and money, right? Because at the end of the day,
Oh yeah.
time is short, right? Things are getting tougher. So if we could save people the wasted times in mistakes and money, because with inflation things are very expensive nowadays, then we could help and provide value to people. So my next question is basically, managing your garden, keeping track of what seeds to plant, when to sow the seeds, when to transplant them to the ground if you started them, in seed trays, and when to harvest those plants for someone that is just starting out can be very overwhelming, right? It's a lot of decisions to make, when to make them. So my question is, how do you decide which crops to grow and how to organize your garden schedule, right? How do you track those crops?
Yeah, I think planting is a non-ending like learning, right? Because there's a lot of aspects that you have to control and a bunch of that you don't control, like the storm, for example. It made a huge curve here because I lost a couple things. Like yucca, they don't like that much of water, so my yard is flooded, like 70% of my yard. So I had yucca everywhere. So we learn from it, right? You cannot go against nature, and you cannot get frustrating, because what I've learned with a friend of mine, she used to say like, hey, if you like plants, you're probably a plant killer, because there's no way of you planting and not like killing, like losing. And so you cannot hold into that. And once you realize that also, it's not that I know everything and I don't need to know more, I don't need to study more. That's the biggest mistake, because when I started planting on a bigger scale, you have to do a lot of researches again. You have to do a lot of, soil preparation, scheduling, like you said. Are you going to plant on trays? Are you going to plant inside the trays or outside? That there's a lot of things, and it could be very overwhelming and very frustrating. I'm not going to lie, because when you start a tray and you're like, oh, these tomatoes pop, there's 100 tomatoes here, and you go to work or you go inside and the next day you see some creature ate like 98 of them, and it could be like very time consuming, like you mentioned, and money too. Like with the economy, we're always trying to save. That's why I like the farming community, because in my opinion, that's the way of doing things, doing together, respecting. And, if you grow food, I can grow the same food as you do. You don't need to compete with me. We can share, we can grow together, we can even sell together. That's the main thing that attracts me from this community as well. After the hurricane, I got a bunch of messages from people that I don't know, and it's amazing for me. So it's a non-ending learning process, in my opinion.
I completely agree. It's life is all about ever learning, right? The moment that you stop learning, then you're no longer growing. And if you're not growing, then really you're going backwards, you
Yeah.
know. And one thing that stood out also was, hey, we could at least control the controllables, right? But there are things we can't control. So hey, that's just the reality.
That's the
And
beauty of it.
exactly, yeah. I mean, we just have to accept the way it is and just learn to have joy in it, you know. And the when it comes to, like, for example, the tomatoes is so true, because earlier this year, during the spring, my almost my entire cherry tomato crops were eaten by squirrels. So I had like a squirrel. I don't know what it was, but because last year it wasn't like that, but this year, literally,
Yeah.
all my cherry tomatoes were being eaten by squirrels. So I have to figure out now for the next few weeks, once they start um, producing again for the new season, how I'm gonna control the squirrels, you know. And yeah, when it comes to farming community and sharing and growing, is so true, because there is abundance. There is, nature produces more than we could ever eat for ourselves, but we have been raised in a scarcity
Oh yeah.
society, and that's not how
Mind.
nature really is. In reality, if everybody was producing, there would be so much. I mean, there already is enough food for everybody. It's just there's a lot of waste. But if everybody was producing, we wouldn't even know what to do with all. We would be
Oh,
just canning. Everybody would be canning and
for
preserving food,
sure.
because there would be too much. And a follow-up question actually is: do you use any specific tools or apps or maybe spreadsheets to plan and track your garden, or not really?
I have my calendar, old school calendar. It's in my wall, right next to my bed, and I write it down everything over there. My wife, she's an amazing tracker too, so she has an agenda. And yeah, I did try a couple apps. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not against technology, but it didn't work for me because most of the time I'm on the outside of the garden, like with my hands all dirty, and then you want to open so. And the price too. I've noticed that the best ones over there you have to pay, and when I try to cut costs, I in my opinion, I don't mind writing down things, and I like paper and a pen still. On my job it's all about technology, but I still have my pen and a paper in the pocket, like.
Definitely, that I agree with you. I think the old school way is always better. And we in case of the phone doesn't work, or the platform falls, you still have it in paper, right? So you don't lose that information. I sort of think of that also. Recently, I got into tracking my diet, and what I eat, and then also my exercises. And at first, I was doing it in an app, and I realized that, man, this is even a hassle. So like now, what I'm gonna start doing is just taking a little notebook to the gym and then doing it in paper. I think it's so much better. And how you mentioned that your wife is a great tracker, it makes me think that at the end of the day, it's a team, right? We can't do everything,
Oh yeah.
and you got your wife, your helpmeet, so she obviously could also help you in that sense. But then, how do you? Or my another question is, when it comes to the uncontrollables, how do you deal with them? What is your mindset around the things that you can't control?
It's tough, I'm not gonna lie. The hurricane, we were praying to go, somewhere else, not hitting nobody, and going to maybe an area that there's not many people, and but he ended up hitting us, not hitting straight, thank God, but it hit us a little bit of a lot of rain and winds, so we had to put like 200 potted plants away, and some stuff we cannot control, like the water in some parts, like 75% of my yard, it's like that right now, so I cannot control. Obviously when you open the door, it's very frustrating, it's heartbroken, But I've learned that the uncontrollable, obviously, you cannot control. And I've heard a lot to, try to manage your energy and not waste your energy on stuff like that, because it in the end of the day, God has a plan for everybody. So you cannot go against that plan or question that plan. Just be faithful and be grateful for what you have. So the curves, obviously, sometimes if you're frustrated already, it could be very overwhelming. Like you mentioned, your tomatoes, you see the squirrels, basically they're laughing at you. But you can laugh together. That's what I've learned. We my one of my daughters, she put names into everything. So there's a squirrel already that it's Milton, because we opened the door, he was hanging on a on a piece of tree over there, and he ran away. And we know he's one of the ones that likes to chew here and there. And now we obviously don't use any chemicals in the yard, so we try to control with stuff that nature's provides, and we go back into the natives and their knowledge. So I got some plants that helps a lot to keep the pests away. And like I mentioned before, the pollinators, the milkweed, for example, that attracts the butterflies. So what I've learned is, I'm Brazilian and I love picanha, right? So if I do a barbecue over here with my friends that loves picanha, and put a salad just with lettuce and tomatoes, no olive, no oil, no nothing, and say, hey, you can choose the picanha or the salad, obviously they're gonna go for the picanha, right? So it's just like what I've learned, and I'm still learning with nature, is if you plant some picanhas for these animals and insects, they will not come straight to your edibles and stuff that you don't want them to come. And there's some garlic plants with the smell of garlic too, that most of these animals, they don't like the smell. So we try to provide the best like ecosystem so everybody gets a piece, but not everything. Like you mentioned, your tomatoes. I had that issue last year as well. First year we got abundance with tomatoes that we start canning, doing sauce, giving away, and then the following year was like not much of a luck between pests, a lot of water, and so I've learned to not get a to always keep motivated. You cannot go and say, hey, oh, I lost all my tomatoes and I'm done with it, because that's not being faithful.
A lot of awesome points that you made, and I'll start with the one that you ended, right? Is staying motivated, staying encouraged. Life, it's ups and downs, right? It's valleys, and it's the ups and downs. If you always want to be up, um, that's not real life. But it's also, we shouldn't always be down, right? We have to learn how to navigate through those ups and downs, encourage, full of joy, full of love, right? Patience. And I love that you said, you know, since we can't control certain things, then don't waste your energy on that, right? Don't dwell on what's going on. Just focus on what you can do today, right? Don't worry about what's going to happen tomorrow. And then you said, God has a plan, and it's so true, right? Because His plan is for us to prosper, right, and not to harm us, and to give us hope and a future. So we just have to, you mentioned, have the faith that whatever is going on is really for the good of us. But
Yes.
it's about the mindset that you have. If you see it as a negative thing, then it will be a negative thing.
Oh, for
But if you
sure.
see it as, hey, how could I make this situation a learning experience, and become something better for me and my family and my community, then that's what you would harvest at the end of the day. So I love that. And then how you mentioned, at the end of the day, there are going to be some pests or some animals, and it's true. Why not then just um, plant already in your planning of what you're going to plant things that would feed those animals or those pests, and then technically then you're feeding them as well. So it's like building that ecosystem. That is awesome. So yeah, no, for sure. And I think that the main thing with that then it comes in is planning, right? You have to design ahead. You can't just start out of nowhere, because then when you encounter all those issues, it's already too
Yeah.
late. That will be then for the next season. So I think the planning ahead is key. And it goes then to my next question, which is, what advice would you give to someone who is completely new to homesteading but is eager to start?
Well, everything everything starts with the soil, right? I think a lot of agriculture process, they forget about it. They just say, "Oh, put some seeds here and that's it." And what I've learned here, it's the soil. You start with a good soil, with good soil preparation, understanding the soil, the micro, the macro nutrients that you have there. And a lot of planning, like you mentioned. It's not just putting the seeds and, oh, I have a green thumb. We can all have a green thumb because it's all about energy. If you put a lot of energy into it and with love and dedication, magically happens. Like, but planning and studying, don't think you learn too much and too little, or vice versa. It's not. It A lot of things can change, like weather, the region you are, the quality of the soil, like I mentioned, and do a very like organized scheduling, like we spoke before. Do the soil preparation, get a good soil. If you're putting on straight to the ground, make sure you prep that soil. If it's in pots, again as well, make sure you get a good soil. I would always go organic. I don't do non-GMO. I always do organic. I think that's what God gave us, and we don't have to change. So yeah.
Definitely, the someone that wants to start homesteading or just even growing their own food, maybe in their backyard if they don't have any a lot of space, is to focus on soil, right? Learning about soil, and because that's where the plants, that is the medium that the seed grows in, right? So if we have a good medium, then that means this, the plant is going to have a healthy environment to
Oh yeah.
thrive in. So it's learning that, and there's a lot of, again, trial and error, but there is a science behind it. So if we just do a little bit of research and learn from those that have already studied and practiced, then we could save a lot of hassle, which it happened to me when I first started, right? Having bad soil, maybe not the proper drainage, maybe too many rocks, or so many different ways that the soil is not healthy. But if you start with that, then you already know that you're ahead of the curve. So completely agree that soil is key. So now going a little bit on the local side, right? Because of course the school community and the podcast is related to anybody in the world, but we are local to South Florida. So I also want to tailor to the local community, right? And I saw one of your posts, and I really like the caption that you put, and it said, "Nothing ever grows without a seed, and nothing ever changes without a dream, because there's no such a thing as growing season in South Florida,"
Yeah.
right? So can you tell us a little bit about that, right? That there is technically we could grow year round, and how it is growing here in South Florida.
Well, I'm from Brazil, so the part of where I am from Brazil, it's São Paulo. It's basically the same weather as here. We don't have like snow, and we don't have like major like winter, so we can grow the whole year round. But obviously it changes, right? So that's one thing that I've learned here, because when you start growing in Florida, you're like, oh, I can grow everything all the time, like, but it's not like that. Everything has a cycle, and I got extremely excited and I got lucky, I'm not gonna lie, because I planted everything on the first year. And it was a good learning experience too, because you know that you might get garlic to sprout here and there, but it's not the right time to plant garlic in July, for example. Let's put it this way, because garlic will need the almost the freezing temperature to give him the chill so he can develop. It's a learning process all the time. I'm not gonna stop telling that, because I'm still learning. I love learning. I wake up and I get into pages, I get to communities, like, and you see these beautiful results, these amazing people sharing and caring. And yeah, this quote that I put it's for the our project that I mentioned to you. Me and my wife started this beautiful project that I'm sure you're gonna ask about it. But it's amazing to be able to grow year round. It for me it's magical. I love plants, not just fruits, not just one way of planting. So I have indoor plants, I have outdoor plants, I have fruit trees, I have exotics. I love everything about nature.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it is so true. Even though we do have a all year growing season, not every plant species grows all year. So we have to learn which plants grow at what time of the year, when to sow them, when to put them in the ground. Because, for example, I grew a lot of okra over the summer because it is very heat resistant, right? And they did great. So it's knowing when and what to plant at the right time, and then also the fact that we there's so many methods of growing. You could grow indoor, you could grow outdoor, you could grow fruit trees, exotics, how you mentioned, growing in containers. I also do that as well, growing in
Yeah.
the ground. So there's so many methods. So if someone wants to get into it, just pick one and start, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
then you learn as you go, and then after you get a little bit of success, you celebrate those small successes and then pick another method, and now you have two. And then you have a little bit more success, now pick another one, and now you have three different ways that you grow. And as time goes by, years go by, now you realize, oh wow, I grow in all these different ways. And if one
Yeah.
doesn't work, you mentioned that one, the first year you had a lot of tomatoes, then the next season you didn't. Well, that's why it's good to have multiple ways of growing, right? That way, if one thing fails due to maybe a storm or some insects or whatever reason, you still have other um, parts of the garden or other methods that you are growing. So I think it's about, just as you mentioned, ever learning and not being stuck to one thing, so yeah, you have options. And it actually segues into the next question. You sort of mentioned it, so I'll just go right into that. And I saw that you announced a couple of weeks ago that you were starting a herbal class for children held every Friday. So can you tell us a little bit about that class, and if you want to invite people to join you?
Oh, for sure. So we started this beautiful project. It's more of my wife, to be honest. She's doing every Friday. She's a herbalist. She was a teacher for 7 years. So teaching is in the family. My mother was a headmaster. My sister, she's a teacher as well. and my wife decided to go on the more of on the hippie side, and she we realized that the little ones, like we're being attacked, for example, right, with the food system, with the technology that most of people are not using on the right way with those iPads, like. So we're taking the kids from nature and putting them into like more of a separated places, that where you mentioned before, right? When you go to a zone that it's at the comfort zone, there's not much growing in there, right? So when you we realized that for our kids, the best way was to homeschool. So we started homeschooling our kids before COVID. And when it hit COVID, we knew for sure that it was the right decision to do, and we started to unschool, which is a little bit of a different process than homeschooling. And we saw the opportunity of teaching kids, not just our kids, but, you know, we go to a lot of groups since we homeschool. So a lot of those groups were mentioning like how important it is to teach the kids the principles, like there's plenty of memes in the Instagram, for example, teach your kids how to name fruits and vegetables instead brands, like Gucci and blah, blah, blah. So we saw the opportunity, and not just the opportunity for the money part, but the need, for this, because we're losing it, right? And we cannot lose. We're not going to lose. So we said yes, it's important, to keep the community learning and growing like we do with the Grow Big or Go Home. And we put like a little leg on this brand and put it the Grow Big Tribe, which my wife started. She's a herbalist. She's been studying herbs for almost 10 years now. And a lot of friends from her started to ask, questions when they see your kids that got a cold, for example, and don't take Tylenol and have fever and don't take anything, you know, be, and they see the results, right? That's what one thing that we changed the mindset, like we mentioned before, we had to change our mindset. I cannot keep the same principles that I have before and go into a homestead, right? You have to adapt. So that's the main thing we did too, because she had different homeschooling programs before, and it didn't work. So finally, this one it's booming because it's nature together with teaching kids, and it's amazing. So today is the first class actually.
Well, that is awesome. And towards the end of the call, I'll ask you to share the information so that anybody that wants to join, obviously, they could connect with you guys. But a lot of points that you mentioned that are just on point. Like for example, the meme that you said you saw that name fruits and vegetables instead of brands. I love that because it's so true. Um, so many different plant species out there that we don't even know how many different fruits are in the world. It's thousands and thousands of fruits, but we normally just know the basic ones, right? That we see in the grocery store. So it's like that's even just a teaching method. um, it develops their intellect, their brains, right? Just by learning something that is concrete, something that they could actually hold in their hands and they could even eat it, right? That's such a great teaching tool that I hadn't thought about, but I'm going to definitely make a note of that because I love that, right? Naming the fruits instead of brands, and also that there is an opportunity in teaching children, but it's not just an opportunity; is also a need. And it reminds me of that we need to train our children in the ways that they should go, right? So that when they get older, they don't depart from it. So if we don't expect them to have um, the right ways of life. You, that's what the you know that's what parents are supposed to do. They're supposed to teach their children the right things, and I think that nowadays education has sort of deteriorated in many ways, you know. But hey, as you mentioned, we're not gonna lose. We're striving to make improvements,
We're the
and you know
pioneers.
we just gotta adapt. Exactly, exactly. It's like a new the new frontier, however people describe that, you know. So we just have to adapt, and we will overcome, right? It's just a matter of putting in a little bit of effort, because everything does take effort, discipline, and consistency, right? Nothing
Oh
happens
yeah.
in one day. It's all having a long-term mindset. That way we could leave an inheritance to our children and leave this world a better place for our children and our children's children, right? And you actually touched a little bit on this, so I would definitely love for you to expand on it, because it was my next question and you already talked about it, and is what are your thoughts on homeschooling?
Well, I mentioned before, so my mom, she was a headmaster of a university in Brazil. So homeschooling in my family was not an easy thing, not an easy way, easy road to take it, right? But we're big kids now, right? I was talking to my sister yesterday, like, hey, mom and dad, they cannot tell you what to do anymore, but just watch and, you know, give us support, right? Homeschooling for us, it's been amazing. I'm a guy against the system. I'm transparent, I'm not completely a cuckoo against the system. And what is a cuckoo against the system, right? But in a lot of ways, I don't agree with the system, and the schooling process for me, it was always frustrated because I like to learn. I don't like to study. You know, it for me, it's a difference in there. If you shove the kids into a classroom and start asking questions, and just like there's a guy saying I know more than you, like I know that a lot of those things from my age and my era changed, because my sister, she's still a teacher on a conventional school. But yeah, homeschooling for us, we're not afraid of it. Some people ask us like, hey, aren't you afraid of making a mistake one day? And I'm like, no, because I'm not teaching my kids how to be a beach bum, but to be a businessman if she wants to, or an entrepreneur, like, or whatever she wants, based on her energy, based on her knowledge and her wants, right? Not just, hey, you're gonna have to be a lawyer because lawyer makes more money and that's what you need. No, like if you want to be a lawyer, go ahead and do it, but make sure you're happy. That's the two examples I have in my house. For example, my mom, she was a teacher, and we all know that school teachers, they don't make a lot of money, right? And she became a headmaster of a university in Brazil. So money wise, she was making a lot of money, when most people said at the beginning of her career, like, hey, you're not going to be anything. And my dad, it's the opposite. He chased money. He did 3 degrees. He has 3 degrees, and he didn't made a lot of money, like. So in the end of the day, like, what went wrong in there? Nothing. Maybe energy, like. And like you mentioned, that I love that, consistency and discipline. If you have those two things, you can control the world, right?
You control your world for sure, at least, right? And improve it and help your family, help your community. And many points that you mentioned are so awesome. And it's like Of course, we live in a system of control, and we have to learn how to navigate through it, right? Because we can't get out of it at the end of the day of this world. We are part of the world, but hey, just as we need to be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves, right? So we can't get out of it, so we might as well learn how to navigate through it. But then the part of homeschooling that I completely support is because that way we could know what our children are learning and prioritize the most important parts of the education for our children, right? Because time does go by very quickly, and then 12 years goes by, and what do you have to show for? You should have a lot to show for if you spend the right focus, the right consistency, the right disciplines, right? Because as you mentioned, your 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 father, he had 3 degrees, and hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have anything against having a degree, because there's definitely benefits in that. But what is the outcome that you're trying to achieve? What
Yeah.
are the actual goals? Make sure that you have a plan for what you're doing, right? Because everyone's path is different. Some people, the path is to go to obtain a degree, but some people are not, right? So we need to have the knowledge and give the path, right? This is one way that you can take, this is another way, but not focus on just one. We need to give children the option to choose, but to be able to choose wisely, they have to have the knowledge to then discern, hey, this is what I'm gonna go and pursue. And then one thing that you mentioned, oh, go ahead. Did you wanted to say something?
No, no, no.
Okay, okay. So, and one thing you mentioned is that people ask you, oh, aren't you afraid of making mistakes when you're homeschooling your children? And I'm like, no, why would I be afraid of making mistakes? That's how you improvise, you made a mistake, and now you adapt and you overcome, right? That is part of success. There is no failure. It's just a
Yes.
lesson, right? The failure only
Yes.
happens if you give up, if you stop trying to learn. So it's really
And
just
if you
about the
believe in a
mindset.
fail.
Exactly. And it's really just about the mindset that you have. So I love that. And when you mentioned learning, I remembered a definition. I don't know if you're familiar with Alex Hormozy, which is the
Yeah.
co-owner of School, which is how I got
That's cool.
into
Yeah.
the school.com platform. And he says that that learning, it's new behavior under the same condition, which means how quickly you're able to change what you do when you see the same thing determines how smart you are, right? So if you don't change your behavior, you're really just consuming information and you're being entertained, right? Because that's something that can happen with the amount of information that we have in the internet.
Oh,
We
for
could spend
sure. For
hours
sure.
and hours listening to videos on how to do any type of project in any industry. And if you don't change your behavior, then you didn't really learn anything and you're just really being entertained, which is very, very dangerous, because I think we've all fallen into that. Just, oh, let me watch these videos. And we think that because we're watching this how to do things, that we are actually making progress. But no, the progress happens when you actually change your behavior and implement the information. Which now, let get into the more concrete aspects of homesteading. One of the key aspects of growing food is irrigation, water management, right? And it's something that I think everybody, no matter where you are in the world, has struggled at some point. And even if you have a system already in place, there's always struggles when it comes to water. So, what do you think are some effective water management strategies for a homestead?
So I have two areas that I'm planting in my house, and one area I don't water at all. I just pull the grass you know, worked on the soil. Like I mentioned before, the soil when I got this property, it was all sand, almost like a beach, because they had horses here and they were training them for competition. So they were stumping the floor, like the ground. It was sand. You could literally get sand and white sand. So I removed the grass where that it still had grass and mulched everything, got very good mulch from pine and palm. And from that area, I stopped watering right after I mulched. So I don't water at all. And when I got too much of a heat, some species that was obviously maybe not ready to, or not the right one to be on that area, because there was a lot of sun. And like when you plant, you have to obviously know your area too, where the sun rises, and where the parts that you get most sun and no sun, to define the species that you're going to put it in. So the other area, I do have an irrigation system because I struggled. you know Here I started on the summer, and wow, I used to go to work and come back, and some species were gone. So it's a learning process. Obviously, we had no shade at all, so we know some species, they thrive on a, like syntropic. When you study syntropic, you realize that that's how the nature is. You're just copying some type of a forest and put in your system, in your area. So the other area, like I mentioned, no water at all, and a lot of things grew, and it's still manageable because especially in Florida here, you get a lot of raining season. So if you mulch, you will keep them moist, and you don't need to water. But the other area, like I mentioned, it's an area that I get like almost 18 hours of sun, and I did have to put some irrigation in there, and some challenges here and there, but it worked. I got a straight hose in the floor and just the small feeders into different areas. I turn on now, not now during the raining season. Obviously, it's off. But when you get a dry season, I turn on like once every 2 days, for 10 minutes, just a little drip. Since Florida, it's very humid, right?
Definitely. Um, I like that you have the two different areas, which goes back to what we mentioned earlier of having multiple ways of growing food, multiple systems. In case one maybe is not thriving in a specific season, you still have another one, right? And I think I learned this from a YouTuber, which maybe is called Adapt 2030, and he mentions that if you have multiple things, you could have a greenhouse, you could have raised beds, you could have a food forest, you could have syntropic agroforestry, you could have how you said, an irrigation system. Depending on the year or the season, maybe one of those would fail, maybe two of those would fail, maybe three. But if you have five or six different types of ways of growing food, it's almost impossible that they would all fail at the same time, right?
Oh,
I
for
mean,
sure.
it can happen. I'm not saying it's completely impossible, but it's very rare, right? Usually, some of them will fail, but then other ones will thrive because they have different characteristics, different inputs, different maintenance, right? So I love that because I've actually also implemented that myself. I'm actually working on implementing a new irrigation system. So that's why I asked you, because I am in the next few weeks trying to come up with a new one, right? I'm thinking of using drip tape and water pumps, because in the property that I have, I don't have electricity yet. I'm still building. So using water pumps, using solar panels so that the pump has the power needed, But then I have another area where it's a food forest, heavily mulched as well, and I don't water at all. So it's awesome because that way, if you don't have as much time to in a season to maintenance, you still have one area that is sort of
Oh
takes care
yeah.
of itself, you know. And my follow-up question is actually regarded related to the first area that you said you mulched and with pine and palms, and that helped with the soil health, right? So, how often do you add mulch to that area?
I'm getting mulch all the time. You know, my yard is still has plenty of potential for areas to grow. Good thing my wife, she's all in, so she's like, hey, food forest it is, you know. And I love plants. She loves plants, so we do indoors, like I said, we do outdoors. And uh the mulch I get like every 3 months, I would say.
Every 3 months.
So right now
Okay.
I got a fresh one that I got a few weeks ago. I'm still spreading. And obviously it all depends because the mulch it will become soil, right? Eventually. So I see it if I cannot control like weeds, right? You get even I didn't put anything under the mulch. Some areas I did put a layer of cardboard. But in the end of the day, you cannot control nature, like we said a couple of times. So I live with it. So when I see a few weeds coming, I know it's time because weeds are getting like sunlight and it's spreading, and also it depends on the soil and what I'm gonna do on that area, right? If I'm gonna plant more, if the soil it's ready and nice with all micro and macro, I cannot, skip that area and maybe plant and mulch it after to make sure it's like all organized and neat. So every 3 months, I would say I put a layer.
That makes a lot of sense. And as you mentioned, the mulch will decompose and become soil at the end of the day. So it's similar to how a forest happens, right? The leaves fall, the branches fall in the ground, and they just stack over each other. And over time, it becomes soil, and that dark soil, right, that is very rich in nutrients. So if we add mulch continually, then we are sort of mimicking nature in a way. And I like one thing that you mentioned, that your wife is all in into the homesteading, growing food forest, wanting to do the gardening and all of that. But that's not the case for a lot of people, right? So there are people that maybe the husband is super into it and wants to do it, and then the wife is not, and doesn't see the benefit in it, right? And that could be an issue because there is a lot of effort involved, time that you have to put into the garden, and an investment too, right? You have to many times buy
Oh yeah.
tools or inputs for the garden, right? So then what would you recommend to someone that is all in to growing their own food and homesteading, but their spouse is not?
Hey, I would say don't stop, especially because the results will show. We know nature sometimes can take time, depends on what you're planting and what your goals are. But definitely don't stop, especially if it's your passion, right? When you're dealing with your passion, you know, don't try to change anything. I try to change people. I try to change my dad so he can see that I'm doing the right thing. But it got to the time that you don't have to change nobody but yourself. So I change a lot of things on my perspective, on my end, and I keep doing it. I kept doing it because I knew that uh, everybody who's around you, it's gonna see it. And I don't do anything for the others but for me and for God, right? So it's my principles, and you can try to skip it, you can try to avoid it, but when it's your passion, you will life will push you towards that until the day that you see a horse right in front of you. Either you jump on it and start galloping, running around, or you're gonna stay on your comfort zone and not much things gonna happen on the comfort zone. So definitely don't stop. Don't look for motivation in your spouse or in your partner, but in yourself. Like in the end of the day, you do it for yourself. So for me, it's amazing to plant a tomato, to see the end results, and to share that tomato with maybe a friend that doesn't care about, but he will definitely taste and say, wow, it tastes better than the pea supermarket.
Definitely. That answers it great because it is something that I have struggled with the past couple of years, but I could now say that I have learned from that, right? As you mentioned, we have to just keep going and then the results will show. And it sort of um, reminds me that, you will know them by their fruits, right? So as long as you keep working on it and you're doing something that is good, then the fruit will be good, and then people will see the the benefits in the effort that is involved and the investment required, right? So yeah, we don't need to change others. Instead, we need to change ourselves, right? And then the fruit will be there, both physically and spiritually, right? It's not just
Oh
talking
yeah.
naturally. And then people would say, then those that are interested in growth as well and in harvesting fruit, both again, physically and spiritually, then they would just naturally approach you and ask you, hey, what are you doing differently? I see a change in you over the past few months or the past few years. How have you done this, right? I want to have that change too. Instead, if you tried before you made the changes to say, hey, you should do these changes with me, they're gonna be
uh
like, it's like, yeah, it sounds
I
good
gave up on
in
that.
theory, sounds good in theory, but you haven't shown me anything yet, right? So really just focus on doing what we know needs to be done, and then the fruit would speak for itself. Of course, while being mindful and respectful and loving, patient towards others, right? Because at the end of the day, especially when you're married, you got to be mindful of that. You have children and all of that. So the investment part, we have to, of course, be very organized and plan ahead in all of that. So my next question is, what are your thoughts on growing fruit trees? The different. Hold on. Let me reframe the question. Um, what experience do you have, or what do you recommend in growing fruit trees, based on growing it from seed or from cuttings or air layering or grafting, right? What do you think about all of that, and what do you recommend to people?
I like to do everything. I like to learn all different aspects. I won't stop mentioning that I love plants. So grafting, obviously, you're gonna get the fruits before, right? You're gonna get the fruits faster because you basically cut one part of the tree that it's fruiting already, that it's mature, and put it on the young one, and it will give you fruits within what, a year or maybe less. And when you're talking about a mango, for example, if you start from seeds, you take a good 5 years, right? They say. So me, I do both. I'm not gonna lie. I have some mangoes that I love mangoes, and people gave me seeds, and I'm like, of course I'm gonna do it, right? I'm not gonna be like, no, no, no. I only do grafted because they give you fruits better or faster. I believe that nature has, I believe it's all about energy though. So I talk to plants, I don't, I don't care. I talk to them, I feel them. So it's a one and one thing, like it's a love partnership with nature. So when you have this partnership, you see beauty everywhere. So I go into my yard. Obviously, I want that mango tree that I love that mango most to give me mangoes faster. But I know she's not grafted, so that doesn't mean she's not growing and she's not giving us, plenty of good things too, right? Same thing with us. When you start planting, it could be frustrating when you plant and you don't see fruits after a year or so. But hey, there's so much beauty in that process, and it's enjoyable, right? You get your hands dirty, you go there, I don't ask them for advices yet. But I talk to them, like, hey, you look beautiful, you're growing, like I feel great about it, like.
Definitely. Yeah, sort of reminds me of a video I saw recently, that water has memory or something like that, and like people talk to it and then they freeze it, and it comes to like some geometric shape.
Form that, yeah.
So that is something that, because I love researching all types of things, and it is very
Me too.
interesting because it's a fine line between, hey, yeah, there is an actual science behind it, and I believe it, right? But then we got to know how to balance it from being practical and concrete, and actually being able to put it into action and being successful with it,
Make it
and
happen.
then just
Yeah.
and then just being in love with this alternative concepts that then it could just become a distraction, right? Trying to learn all these different things that we don't get taught on regular school, that are indeed helpful, and there can be some truth to them, because in everything there probably is some benefit. But then we gotta learn how to use take what is useful, and then not waste too much time in what really there's no evidence or practical application. So I think it's great because um, it's not just one way of doing things, right? So to be open to learning new things, and then test it, right? Hey, where does this come from? Is this actually useful, or is it really just going to waste my time? So I think it's being able to entertain a new concept that maybe contradicts what you already knew about the subject, and say, hey, is this true or not, and can this actually be helpful? you know
One thing I give an advice to, it's never too much of planting, so don't, if you ask about grafted or seeds, go and do it, go all out, especially if you have space. And even if you don't have space, you can do tests, because I've put like thousands, no, but hundreds of seeds together at the same time, and you don't get them all popped at the same time, right? So one will pop here, the other one is sprout there, and some will take even weeks after the other one. So it's like I said, I see beauty everywhere. So you need to, change your mindset, not to become like a cuckoo guy and, oh, it's so much beauty. But hey, it's a process. So you start with the soil, you start with smelling the soil, you look at your hands, dirt everywhere in your nails, and you don't care, right? Because that's all together, that's all part of that magical process.
I mean, it's therapeutic too. There's so much stress in the
It
world
is very
nowadays,
therapeutic.
and we are so disconnected from nature. And when you get in that soil and your hands dirty, it's better than any therapy or any session that you could have, is because you're actually working hard, and it's also physically demanding. So but it's not too intense. So for people that maybe have injuries or they're older, it's still possible, right? So there's so many benefits to it.
For sure.
but
For sure.
but but then the key is that you just have to go and do it, right? And it's so true. If you do have the space, just try it all. Like, just plant a bunch of fruit trees, a bunch of vegetables, and all of that. And some of them won't work, but a lot of them will. And then you learn from the mistakes, and then next time you'll do a little bit better, you know. And my next question is, actually, I saw one of your posts about Cuban oregano, and it's something that caught my eye, because I have a lot of those in my property, and they grow very easily. They spread very easily. You don't have to take care of it. You don't have to water it at all, and it keeps growing. Even if you chop it and then just throw it somewhere as if it was going to be in the compost pile, it grows in the compost pile. It's
Oh, it
just
will.
so
It will. It will.
resilient. So
It
can
grows in the
you
trash.
exactly, yeah, it's so like it just grow so easily. So can you share a little bit about the Cuban oregano and their uses, and how someone could start growing it, and what do you recommend?
Oh yeah. So Cuban oregano, I planted right next to our chicken coop because we I've learned with the grandmother of a friend in Brazil. She used to plant Cuban oregano right next to the chicken coop and either dry them and put it on the mix on the chicken food. Parasites. It has anti-inflammatory as well properties. So it's magically. And I also learned that not just for the chickens and for humans too. So here in the house, we dry them and we mix a little bit of on their food. I also chop the top of it so it won't overgrow because, like you mentioned, it will actually will grow into the trash when you put it in the trash, and when you see it, it's someone is making their way out. And we chop the top to prevent them growing and smush a little bit and put it on the chicken's water on a every 2 or 3 days, and to help them with parasites as well. And it helps a lot, though, a lot. People take it for granted because it's an easy plant to grow. And, there's some people say, oh, I don't like this plant because it's not beautiful. But the properties that it carries, it's amazing for humans and animals. So we plant it everywhere in the house. It also helps with controlling pests. A lot of mosquitoes, they don't like that plant. Some spiders, they don't even get close to it. So it has a harsh smell and beautiful properties though. So since it grows like easy, and it's a companion plant for a lot of other ones, like it helps with holding and sharing properties in the soil with other plants. So why not, when you have abundance of a species, instead of saying like, no, take it for granted and yeah, I have two or three. No, put it everywhere. My chicken coop, I have an oak tree right next to it, and on the base of the oak tree, it's all Cuban oregano already. Even my daughters know that the process. So every here and there, they chop the top of it, a few branches, and put it in their water. Try to give them straight to the chickens. And hey, knock on wood, no parasites anymore.
Yeah, that is awesome. And I currently don't have chickens. I am in the planning stages of introducing them to my property, but my neighbors do have chickens. So I'm actually going to give them some cuttings of the oregano so that they could start implementing this, because hey, I know that chicken feed is very expensive and most people just buy, the
Oh
big
yeah.
bags of grain. So if you could some, at least a small portion of the feed be grown yourself, then they're gonna be saving money and also the chickens are gonna be healthier. And I think this is a great example of knowing your area, knowing what grows well and naturally in your geographical location and climate, because we want to plant those species that just naturally thrive in our area, because that way we don't have to maintain them, we don't have to water them too much at all, actually, when it comes to this oregano. And then it's just a win-win in all ways. Now, the next segment, I sort of want to go around the subject of food security and knowledge of skills needed to grow your own food. And I remember my dad sharing with me when he lived in Colombia. He was born in the 50s, early 50s, and he would mention that his family had a rural farmhouse, right? In Spanish, say a finca. So it's like a homestead in the rural areas outside of the city, and that he clearly remembers when he was 7, 8 years old, the cows every morning going into the courtyard of the house, because back in the day, there was always a courtyard in the middle of the house. And there's actually a reason for that, right? Like there's a reason why houses back in the day had a courtyard in the middle, which now architecture doesn't have that anymore somehow. But anyways, he would tell me that they would every morning they would bring the cows in the house, milk them. They always had crops, and it was just a normal thing, right? Like he grew up in that. Um, and from that experience, it seems to me, and what I think is that that was probably the last generation where their parents and grandparents were still very knowledgeable of growing their own food and keeping livestock, right? Like people born in the 50s were still able to experience that lifestyle where it
Oh
was
yeah.
just normal. It was just a normal thing that all families had some animals and grew at least some vegetables, right? But that's not really the case anymore. Even people that live in a very rural area nowadays, they still don't. A
They
lot of
don't have
people
it.
don't have any animals, don't grow any vegetables or fruits. So then the question to you is, why do you think this basic knowledge and skills needed to grow your own food has been lost through the passing of time?
Hey, I mentioned before, I don't lie, I don't hide. I'm against the system. So I think it's part of the system, right? Because the other day I saw this post about hospitals, for example, right? Hospital is the same constructions physics of a hotel, right? It's a building with a bunch of rooms. So when they build a hotel, they need to make sure the hotel, it's not full occupancy because it's almost impossible. But at least I believe 70% the hotel needs to be full in order to profit. So the guy was like, "What do you think about the hospitals? What does it change?" Right? So they need to be full as well, right? In order to be profitable. So now going deep on that one, I think that was a major thing of the system to control us. You control people by their food, right? If you get them hungry, you can control them easily. So with the monoculture, I think was the biggest mistake of humans doing monoculture, because number one, if you plant only tomatoes and if you get pests or something, you lost all the tomatoes and your investments, right? And if you plant tomatoes, cucumbers, corn, even on a better uh, project with agriculture, the syntropic agriculture involved and everything, you can plant everything together at the same time, basically. And with the monoculture, you couldn't. So what they did is they forced us to do monoculture, to get us to depend on their chemicals and on their machines and stuff. So with that, they control who does it, right? And who had more money, who had more money, basically. So when they started to controlling us like that, my grandfather sold his property because he couldn't afford more for the fertilizers, and every year you need more and more and more, instead of regenerating your soil and not need any of those chemicals. It's a huge cut in your profit, right? So I believe that it was a project, a project from the system, a goal for the system, to make sure that we all depend on their food supplies and whatever they want to poison us with, right? Because most of the foods nowadays, it's poison. We changed here like 7 years ago, the C's, from calories for the C's as chemicals, looking at the products that we buy. We don't look for the calories anymore because we know we burn them, but the chemicals, some of them will stay in your system for years. So I think it's the major plan of them controlling us with the food, making sure that we don't grow food because it's so easy. It's basically embarrassing how easy it is to grow food in your house. It's not because I have a green thumb. It's not because I grow food for years in my house, but it's easy. You can grow tomatoes out of garbage cans if you want to. You can, if you plant a watermelon on the right season, on the right time, man, it will take over the whole yard or your whole house. You're gonna see watermelons popping everywhere. So it's easy. You need consistency. Yeah, you need this and there. I'm not saying like anybody just throw a seed in there and it will grow. But hey, at the same time, I'm saying yes, it will grow. And you know that. Most of listeners knows, and so I think it's part of them. Unfortunately, part of the project to make sure that they control us. And most of the big corporates nowadays, we know that it's all about money, 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 and control us, and making sure we go back to their hospitals when we're 60s.
Yeah, I like how you frame that answer because it's so true. I do also believe it was on purpose and a plan all along because it was just the way that people were back in the day, just because of the need, right? If you didn't have a reliable food source or a supermarket to simply go and buy the food, then you needed to learn how to do it yourself. And that was just the way humans have lived all since the beginning of time, right?
Oh yeah.
It was just, hey, we need food, so we need to know how to produce it, and we can't produce it all. We gotta produce a portion of it. So whatever I can produce, I will trade with my community, and then we would have what we
Yes.
need, right? I might not have chickens, but I have cows. So hey, give me some of the eggs. I'll give you some milk. Every once in a while, we will harvest a cow, and then we share on the meat. You're growing tomatoes. I'm growing okra. Let's trade. All of that has been lost.
Even free time to help. I may not have space to do it, but I like plants. I want to help. That's the community part that we lost it in a way somewhere. We lost it.
Exactly.
Me, I live in a dead end street. There's like 20 houses in my street. It's a dirt road, 1.2 acres every house, and I'm the only one growing food in there. That's that's wrong. I'm not
Ex-
judging my neighbors, but that's wrong. Some of them, they chopped the fruit trees they had, from previous owners and stuff. Man, eh, it's heartbreaking. Like you go like, wow. You go to work and you come, there's a massive mango tree chopped down just because they needed space, or oh, I don't like mangoes. They we don't eat mangoes. They on the mango season, that's one thing I've heard. Mango season, they fell down and like birds come, and I'm like, really? You can put it online, and people will come here and actually take care of your fruit tree, for you, and harvest and give you some and take some. Really? I said, yeah, that's the community. There's websites for it nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a process, right? It didn't all happen all at once. It takes
No,
generations to little by little program the society into a way of thinking that we don't need to take our food production into our own hands, that we could just rely on going to a supermarket, and
no,
also programming the mindset of the people into thinking that it is hard to do it, right? As you mentioned, it is not hard to grow your own food. It is actually very easy. It just takes a little bit of trial and error, a little bit of knowledge that you have to gain at first, just the basics. And then, of course, it does take a lot of effort and consistency. But effort doesn't mean hard. Effort just means that you have
no.
to put in the work,
Do
but
it.
it's still easy. It's just like working out. Doing a bicep curl is not a hard thing to do. Anyone knows how to do a bicep curl. It just takes effort, right? And then, how you mentioned, the consistency part. Anybody could go and let do a bicep curl, but that doesn't mean that now your muscle has grown, a few inches. No, it's the consistency doing that bicep curl over a whole year or 6 months, and now you're gonna see that it grew a little bit. You got a little bit stronger. So same thing with
Oh,
growing
yeah.
food. It's not hard. It's just that you need to put in the effort and be patient, and then you're gonna harvest, a few months down the road. And when it comes to a fruit tree, a couple of years down the road. You know.
Yeah. Not just look for the results, right? People want the results. People want to lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. And I have a friend of mine, a good friend of mine. He says, hey, if you want to lose weight, guess what? You're going to end up finding somewhere.
Man, you just hit on a point that is so key that I have learned this year, because we of course it's important to set goals and get to those goals and achieve them, right? But the reality is that it's really not about, I mean, you should want to reach the goal, because if not, then then you don't have anything to show for.
Yeah.
But in reality, is who you become in the process, is what you learn in the process, right? Is falling in love with the work, is knowing that even if I put all the work and I do all the effort, it might still not work. It might still not work, and you might not get any harvest, but it doesn't matter, because you learned something in that process. You
You learn a lot. You
became
learn a
a
lot.
better person in that process, right? And now you have something to share to others, of knowledge, of an experience, right? So it's not about going back to you know, going to the gym or whatever. It's not about losing the weight. It's not about being able to lift X amount of weight. No, it's really about falling in love with having a healthy lifestyle. You don't even have to
Oh,
go to the
yeah. Yeah.
gym
Being
if you don't
healthy,
want.
though. Being healthy.
Just just be active somehow. You don't have to track your calories and your macros if you don't want, but at least be mindful of what you eat, right? But if your goal is simply to lose 20 pounds, once you lose them, then what happens then? So, because it doesn't matter if you lose the 20 pounds. Nobody cares, really. No one is thinking, hey, did Pedro lose weight? No one cares. you know
Sure.
no one cares. At the end of the day, it's about you. And if it's only about the goal, once you reach that goal, you're still gonna feel empty inside. So
It's
it's
gone.
really about loving the process, right? And the work. And as long as you know you did your best, you put in all the work that you could with the resources that you had available, then the results don't matter anymore. But the truth is that if you put in the work and you do the right steps, most of
Oh,
the times you will have the results.
magic happens.
And this question went a little longer than I thought it was, but that's fine, right? And I don't want to lose the next question, because it's very related to the question of how we lost that knowledge of growing our own food through the passing of time. And is How important do you think food security is today?
Oof. It's basically everything, right? Because if you want to control a population, you starve them. You know, I don't know you, you're Latino just like me. We have different scenarios, in our area. Like, you know, Venezuela, Cuba, the biggest one is Cuba. I deal with a lot of Cubans. My wife, she dealt with the Cubans that were lied to, like that now they have 80 to 9 years old. And it's scary, right? To see it. And if you think about it, it's very close to us, right? Those things. People say we're just one or two elections from it. And some people don't believe it. Some people say, oh, this is conspiracy theories. I don't care if you believe it or not, but the way we see, the way we know that you can control a population is by starving them or controlling their food supplies. So for me, one of the biggest things that we took the step on going into a farm area, it's to grow food and to be able to, like you said, it's basically impossible to be out of the system for now. We still need it, we still rely on it. I'm not gonna cry over split milk, but we need to change. We need to change now. That's why we get the chickens too, because eggs, we it's not just about wanting to have your egg. It's about learning what they put in your egg. They vaccinate chickens with God knows what. They then spray their eggs right after they say it's fully organic and pasture raised and whatever, free cage, whatever, the logos, the names, the nice names, they lie to us. And then you realize that a company owned by this horrible guy that I don't even mention their names anymore spray something on the egg just to make sure it will last longer, like they say, or prevent us from getting bacteria. And when you see those chemicals, you're like, hey, wait, I clean my floor with those chemicals. Like, is that good for you? Is that really like a short amount that, oh, it doesn't do anything? But what if you eat a lot of eggs, on 60 years old? Like, this small amount will become a huge amount, especially if your system doesn't flushes. If you don't do any procedures to flush your system from heavy mineral, heavy metals, like harsh chemicals and stuff like that. So for me, it's the key thing. It's to grow your own food. You may not be able to grow all of your food, but you mentioned before that's the community part. It pops, and you grow banana, I grow tomatoes, you grow this, he grows that, and I get chickens here, you get a cow. For me, it's one of the most important things nowadays for a family to think about it. It's to grow their own food, not lying, not because I grow my own food, not because we give courses here and there, I do gardens here and there, but this is the most important thing. We are what we eat. So that's it. When I learned that we are what we eat, that clicked, you know.
Yeah, 100%. I think from all that you mentioned, it all comes back to knowledge, right? And a lot of people don't take the time to gain the right knowledge and do the research necessary to then open their eyes and change their mindsets, right? Because we have been raised in an educational system that doesn't teach us
You don't question much.
to critically think, even though critical thinking was part of English, English class. But in reality, that's now they don't really want us to critically think, because once you start questioning things, then you realize that you don't really like the answers that you're obtaining, and
Yeah,
then that means that, hey, all I need to do is change what I do, because at the end of the day we can't change everything, the entire world or the system, but we do have a lot of control on what we do personally with our family and our community. So in reality, there is a lot we can do, right? And I think it's really just about knowledge, and that's why it's important that people that are into growing food and homesteading share that knowledge and see each other as help, that we could help each other instead of competition, right? Because
Oh
then
yeah,
we
for sure.
could bring that information and knowledge to others, and maybe they would realize, hey, yeah, this is not as hard as it seems, and there is a benefit to it, right? And there is also a risk involved with not doing it. So at the end of the day, everyone has their choice. We're not saying that everyone has to do it, right? So it's just what are the benefits in it, and there's really no drawbacks in doing it, in learning how to grow your own food, in having a little piece of land and having animals. There is no drawback, because even the effort, you're doing
No,
a little bit of exercise, right? So there really is no cons. So there's only benefits. But hey, everyone has to come to that conclusion on their own. We can't force it on anybody.
we can't force them. Yeah.
Exactly. Um, so I only have two more questions. So this one you sort of touched on it, but how can people learn which plants are in season and grow well in their specific area, regardless where they are?
I use a lot of Google. I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of information in Google. It's a matter of trusting and verifying, right? You just don't trust everything you read. But there's a lot of good sources. And one thing that I like about farming and the farming community, it's like you said, we don't see each other as enemies or competitors, but people adding to each other, like if you grow tomatoes and I grow tomatoes too, why not share and, like even do a little competition here and there to, make it fun or something like that instead of like, hey, oh, I hope they get rain or something, that the negative thing for me, it's a no-go, like it's like you drinking poison expecting your enemy dies. Like it's a no-go for me. So for sure, like knowledge, look for, like there's libraries, tons of libraries. I'm right in front of a library right now, and I'm gonna go there to get some books. I'm not a biggest reader, but there's a lot of knowledge that maybe you can get a huge book and get just a little piece of knowledge that counts. So I would definitely go into learning first your zone, right? Your hardest zone, so like from like a bigger like perspective, like people that went to school for it, they have satellites, they have all this technology to see what zone you're in, especially if you live in America. If you go and check your hardest zone, you will show a lot of things that you can grow in your area. So with that information, you can do a monthly research and see, hey, what can I do on the next month and the next season? Like, and once you learn the cycle, it doesn't change, right? You just decide what you want to add into your pottery and what you want to, mix in your cauldron and do the magic. So I do a lot of Google, you know and to find good sources. And we have some in our community, some major people with knowledge, like Tiago. I think you did a podcast with this guy. He's a guru, so, and he will answer all the questions, like, so why not look for those? He's happy to share. I'm happy to share whatever I know, whatever I don't know. I'd like to learn together, like, so it's worth it.
For sure. I mean, anybody that wants to start, it just they just need to do the research online. And as you mentioned, there is a lot of information out there. So you just have to prove all things, right? And hold fast to that which is good, because not everything is correct. But it just a matter of having discernment. And friendly competition is healthy, I think, right? Um, that's how you could learn from others. And if you're not surrounding yourself by people that are better than you, then how are you going to grow, right?
Oh
You're
yeah,
just in your comfort zone. So, as you mentioned a lot of times about comfort zone, so it's okay
it
to put
pushes you,
yourself
right? It pushes you.
in a
Yeah,
room where everyone is better than you. If it comes to growing food, it's okay to be around people that know more about growing food, because then you're going to learn from them, right? And then at some point you're going to be that person that is going to be teaching others on how to grow food. But it takes
it's
humility.
even better.
Exactly. And it takes humility, because being able to accept that, hey, I don't know everything and there are people that could teach me. Sometimes people don't want to humble themselves, but it's
Oh yeah.
necessary. It's a part of life. Also, the learning from books is key, right? Because with the internet nowadays, computers, phones, we have gotten accustomed to learning from videos and audiobooks. I mean, podcasts, which is the platform, right? I'm not saying that is a bad thing. There is definitely great way. Like if I'm at the gym, I'm usually listening to some type of podcast, so I learn something in the meantime. Or if I'm gardening, I'm also listening to some educational thing.
Oh
But
yeah.
going back
Yeah.
to learning from books is so key, because there is a plethora of information on books in the libraries that are not online, but it takes a lot of effort to go through those books, right? So I hadn't thought about that, and it's true. We do need to get back to reading more books, and then learning your hardiness zone. At least in the United States, we have that tool available. Everywhere else in the world, they don't necessarily have those, separations of zones, but it is very easy to type in online, hey, I live in this part of Australia. How does that compare to the hardiness zone of South Florida? Right. And then technically, the same things that grow in this hardiness zone then would grow in that part of the world. So it really just takes a little bit of effort. So my last question is really
Yeah.
around the event that happened this week here with the hurricane. And of course, natural disasters and storms is a factor that everyone that is growing food, farming, growing livestock, and homesteading has to deal with, right? So, what would you recommend to someone that has to prepare for an upcoming storm to do to prepare their homestead for it?
Ooh, that's a tough one. First year we got hit here. I lost a bunch of stuff, right? Got very frustrated, not gonna lie. Thought about, hey, I'm giving up, like, but giving up, it's not an option. So I sat down and I learned from my mistakes, and from nature, you know. I usually say that I don't know enough, so we always need to learn more and more and more. So what I've learned on my property is windbreakers. I have a bamboo that it was there when I got the house. I love bamboo, and now I know how important it is bamboo because it's a very strong plant and it will grow in water, so you cannot overwater your bamboo. So if you can do a windbreaker with bamboo or whatever species you can, put it in there to prevent, because it will prevent, right? On an area from my house, I didn't get anything because there was a big bush behind, so it protected like magically. And water, you cannot hide from the water, right? Especially in Florida, because here it's a swamp, so the drainage here, it's not good, right? There's water sitting in my yard from the previous storm. So if you think about it, this one, it just add up. You can pump the water, you can do some things to prevent as well. But the biggest thing I've learned with those events is plant a lot, right? And I kept the precious species that I wanted to, to make sure it was safe. I kept them in pots. So, I still have a banana that I love in pot. I still have a mango that I love in pot. And when those events come, I take them inside, and livestock, it's hard because they can get traumatized, right? With those events. The chickens, they took like a day and a half to leave their cage when we opened because they were like, oh, like we got hit with 60 miles per hour wind, like that. But their house, it's tougher than ours. So and we built a fort for them. So thankfully nothing happened. We made sure, like, if you're in a flood zone, you have to be ready, right? Flood zone is flood zone. That's the name of it. So it's hard to plant on a flood zone in Florida. But if you're not on a flood zone and you get flooded here and there, you can maybe look for more mulch, for example, and try to raise, your soil and make sure you plant species that like water and don't mind to get dumped for a couple of days, and the ones that they like to be dry, you put it on a, because here my yard, it's all elevated, right? When they build a house, so on the house area it's elevated, so you can take advantage from that elevation and put some species that they don't like that much of a water. And wind barriers, like I mentioned, I have the front yard, it's covered with clusius, and it helped too, so I didn't get much wind on that area. So that's a good tip, I believe.
Definitely. Yeah, windbreakers is a big deal. I've actually wanted to get bamboo in my property. It's something that, because not only is it a windbreaker, but once they are mature, you could also build with bamboo, right? Depending on which ones if you get the thicker ones, then you could actually build with it. And if you get the thinner ones, you could use them as like trellises and many different uses for bamboo. So I really like that and I want to implement that. And also building strong shelters for our livestock, I think is important, with depending on your area, having in mind what type of storms you're going to have. That way your livestock is safe during any given storm. So yeah, man, I really appreciate your time today, taking the time to speak with me and answering all the questions and sharing your knowledge, challenges, and experiences. And for anybody listening, can you please share how they could find you online on social media, and if they want to get in contact with you, how they could do that?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrived to be here. Beautiful podcast that you have, beautiful mission, you know I'm thrilled. And to find me, my page is grow big or go home. I think you can put, when you publish there, the link, and also the link for our wife's page that we just started, which is Grow Big Tribe. And yeah, I'm happy to get questions if you guys have, share my knowledge, meet up. I'm looking forward to meet you up as well, Andres. Thanks for having me, man. I'm very excited and very happy to be part of it.
For sure, man. Hopefully soon we could meet in person and have another great talk and help each other out. Maybe have a day of planting or something. So
Sure.
finally, I want to take this opportunity to invite everyone watching to join our Grow Food Homestead community on school.com, where we help landowners and homesteaders learn about growing food, homesteading projects, permaculture, syntropic agroforestry, self sufficiency. We talk about the system as well, also how to grow, how to make money with planting, farming, and working the land. So again, Pedro, thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you, everybody listening. And don't forget to tune in next time for more great tips and insights on growing food and homesteading.
Thank you, Andres.